I had barely stepped through the sliding doors of the emergency room when my knees gave out. The fluorescent lights above spun into streaks as the tiled floor rushed up toward me. Somewhere in the chaos, I heard voices shouting a pair of strong arms catching me before I hit the ground. My body felt like it did not belong to me anymore. Heat burned in my veins, every breath rattled, and the faint taste of something bitter clung to my mouth. I wanted to scream, but all I managed was a broken whisper. The nurse who caught me was a man in his late 30s with kind eyes. His badge read James Carter. He eased me into a wheelchair with practiced speed. I felt the pressure of his hand on my shoulder grounding me. His voice was steady, reassuring, yet edged with alarm. "We are going to take care of you. You are safe here." Safe. The word echoed strangely in my head. For days, I had not known what that felt like. James pushed me down the hall at a pace that made my head loll against the chair. I clutched the armrest, my fingers trembling. Every bump sent waves of pain through my abdomen and ribs. My skin was a patchwork of bruises, each one throbbing with its own pulse. I tried to cover my wrists with the sleeves of my jacket, but James noticed anyway. His jaw tightened. Purple bands wrapped around my arms like cruel bracelets marks left by someone who wanted me silent and compliant. We turned into an examination room. The door shut behind us, muffling the noise of the crowded ER. I smelled antiseptic sharp and sterile, almost comforting. A woman entered quickly, her white coat flowing behind her. She introduced herself as Dr. Catherine Jenkins. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes darkened the moment they landed on me. I could see her shift into professional focus, yet compassion flickered across her face like a candle flame. She knelt beside me rather than towering above. "Rachel," she said softly, "is it all right if I examine you? We just need to understand where the pain is coming from." I nodded, too weak to resist. Her hands were careful, respectful, but even the lightest touch made me flinch. When she pressed against my side, I gasped so sharply that tears blurred my vision. She whispered an apology, though we both knew she had nothing to be sorry for. James stood nearby, setting supplies on the counter, his movements brisk but deliberate. I noticed how his eyes never left me, as if afraid I might vanish if he looked away. He adjusted a blanket over my shoulders when I shivered. The simple kindness nearly broke me. I had been surrounded by cruelty for so long that gentleness felt foreign. Dr. Jenkins asked questions in a calm rhythm. "How long have you been feeling this pain? When did the fever start? Did you take any medication?" I struggled to answer, my voice ragged. "Yesterday evening, after I came back from a trip with my father." Her pen scratched across the chart, but when she looked up, I saw the concern deepen. She checked my pupils with a penlight, listened to my heart, examined the bruises along my arms. When her fingers traced the outline of a mark circling my neck, her breath caught for just a moment. She quickly masked it, but I saw the way she exchanged a glance with James. My shame burned hotter than the fever. I wanted to tell them it was not my fault that I had tried to fight back, but the words stuck like stones in my throat. Blood was drawn. Monitors beeped steadily. I drifted in and out of clarity, hearing fragments of conversation. Blood pressure dropping, elevated temperature, unexplained contusions. When Dr. Jenkins returned with the first set of results, her hands shook slightly as she held the printout. She studied the page, her lips pressing into a thin line. Her eyes glistened. "Rachel," she said carefully, "there are traces of a powerful sedative in your system. This is not a medication anyone should give without strict supervision, especially not to someone your age." My breath hitched. The room tilted. My father, the drink, the laughter. It all crashed together in my mind like shards of broken glass. Dr. Jenkins swallowed hard, composure cracking for a brief instant. She turned to James, her voice firm, though it trembled at the edges. "Call it in. Now." James reached for the phone on the wall, dialing quickly. I heard the words that would change everything. "This is Dr. Catherine Jenkins at St. Mary's. I need immediate law enforcement response. Possible case of abuse with confirmed sedation." The receiver clicked back into place. The room went still except for the steady beeping of the monitor and my ragged breathing. I lay there beneath the harsh hospital lights, every bruise screaming a story I could no longer hide. For the first time in years, someone believed me enough to call for help. I closed my eyes and let the tears come. This was only the beginning. My name is Rachel Morgan, and I was 22 years old when everything in my life finally cracked open for the world to see. To understand how I ended up in that emergency room, you need to know the history that bound me like chains. My mother, Anna Morgan, was the light of my childhood. She was warm, patient, the kind of woman who made even a rainy afternoon feel like an adventure. When I was 10, she was diagnosed with cancer, and within months, she was gone. Her death left a hollow in me, but it also created a power vacuum that my father Nathan quickly filled with iron fists. He remarried less than a year later. Victoria swept into our lives with her designer clothes, perfectly painted nails, and eyes that cut sharper than glass. She smiled for neighbors and church gatherings, but inside our home, she was a storm, and I was the target of her thunder. From the beginning, Victoria saw me not as a daughter, but as an obstacle. I reminded Nathan of the wife he had lost and of the love he once had, and Victoria could not bear it. She told me more than once that I was the shadow haunting her marriage. I was 13 when she first hissed, "You do not belong here," and the words sank deep. Nathan changed too. The man who used to toss me into the air and laugh at my drawings turned cold. He called me ungrateful when I asked about my mother. He told me I owed him loyalty and obedience because he kept a roof over my head. I became invisible in my own house, an unwanted guest, tolerated only because of the money my mother had left behind. That money was supposed to be mine, a college fund in my name. But Nathan managed to get control of it after her death, claiming he was the guardian of my best interests. For years I believed him when he said he was protecting it for me, but by the time I reached high school, I began to suspect the truth. He used those funds as leverage for everything. When I wanted to apply to an art program out of state, he shook his head and said no money for that. When I asked to join a study abroad trip, he sneered, "Maybe if you were worth the investment." Every opportunity was dangled and then yanked away until I stopped asking. By the time I was in college, Victoria wielded that financial control like a whip. If I pushed back against her cruelty, she would remind me that Nathan paid my tuition. "Do you want to end up waiting tables instead of graduating?" she would ask with a smile. "You think anyone else will support you? You better learn your place." My place was silence. My place was gratitude for crumbs. I lived in fear that one wrong word would cost me everything I had worked for. My friends at school had no idea. To them, I was just another stressed college senior juggling classes and part-time jobs. None of them knew that when I went home on weekends, I walked into a battlefield where every step was a landmine. Victoria criticized my clothes, my weight, even the way I breathed. Nathan dismissed my opinions with a wave of his hand. Sometimes he ignored me for days as if I truly did not exist. Other times he exploded, his voice booming through the house until I shrank into myself. There was no winning. If I excelled, Victoria accused me of showing off. If I stumbled, Nathan called me a disappointment. Financial control was their favorite weapon. I never had direct access to the account my mother had built for me. Nathan kept the documents locked in his study. Whenever tuition was due, he made a grand show of writing the check as if he were doing me a favor. When I once asked why the balance seemed smaller than it should be, he slapped the table and shouted, "You do not question me. That money is mine to manage. You should be grateful I allow you a cent." At 22, I should have been planning graduate school or internships. Instead, I felt trapped in a cage built of grief and manipulation. Every decision I made had to be measured against the risk of losing financial support. The weight of dependence pressed down on me until I barely recognized myself. I knew the situation was toxic, but walking away seemed impossible. Without that money, I could not finish my degree. Without a degree, I feared I would be stuck in dead-end jobs forever. Nathan knew it. Victoria relished it. Together they chipped away at my identity until I felt like nothing more than a pawn in their game of control. Looking back, I can see how calculated it all was. They kept me dependent, isolated, unsure of my own worth. When neighbors asked, Nathan bragged about being a devoted father paying for his daughter's future. Victoria smiled sweetly and told them I was headstrong but spoiled. Behind closed doors, they reminded me every day that I was powerless. This was the soil from which the nightmare grew, the foundation that made me vulnerable to what happened next. When my father suggested a weekend trip, I thought maybe it was a chance to repair something broken. I wanted to believe he still cared that somewhere beneath the ice was the man who once tucked me in at night. I was wrong. The weekend began with promises of fresh air and family bonding, but from the first moment I sensed something was off. My father told me we were going camping at Pinewood Lake, a place I had loved as a child. I packed clothes suited for hiking, sturdy shoes, and even my old fishing rod. I wanted to believe him, wanted to think maybe this time he meant it. Instead of heading toward the woods, he drove us across town, past neighborhoods I did not recognize until we pulled into the driveway of a sprawling house. It was the kind of place that looked expensive but hollow, with too many windows and a yard littered with beer cans. Loud music pulsed from inside, bass heavy and jarring, not at all the quiet serenity of the lake. My stomach knotted as soon as I stepped out of the car. A line of strangers streamed in and out of the front door, carrying bottles, laughing too loudly, their eyes sliding over me with interest that made my skin crawl. I looked at my father, confused. I thought we were going camping. He did not meet my eyes. "Change of plans," he muttered. "We are staying here with friends." Friends. The word felt wrong. These were not people I had ever seen before, and nothing about them suggested friendship. I hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps, but Victoria appeared suddenly, her heels clicking against the wood. She looked elegant in a silk blouse out of place among the chaos, but her smirk told me she was exactly where she wanted to be. She leaned close, her perfume choking me, and whispered so only I could hear. "This is a lesson, Rachel. Tonight you will learn who holds the power." Inside the house, the air was thick with smoke and alcohol. Music throbbed against the walls, drowning out my protests. The living room was packed with men and women clutching red cups, their laughter sharp and cruel. My father disappeared into the crowd, almost immediately leaving me stranded by the door. I tried to follow him, but bodies pressed in around me, strangers with glazed eyes and greedy smiles. Someone shoved a drink into my hand. I pushed it away. Another hand forced a cup back at me. "Drink," a man slurred. "Loosen up." I shook my head, but Victoria's voice cut through the din. "Do as you are told." Her eyes pinned me with quiet menace. "If you refuse, remember who pays for your future." My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to run, but every exit seemed blocked. I lifted the cup, praying it was only soda. The liquid burned bitter against my tongue, unfamiliar and heavy. Within minutes, my head felt fuzzy, my limbs slow. The room swam, faces blurring into shadows. Laughter echoed distant and cruel. My father stood across the room, watching, his arms folded, expression unreadable. He did nothing. He said nothing. He just let it happen. I stumbled toward him, desperate for protection, but Victoria intercepted me. She brushed hair from my face with mock tenderness and whispered again, "This is what happens when you forget your place." The last clear image I carried from that night was of my father turning his back as I swayed the cup, slipping from my hand. After that, everything dissolved into fragments. A staircase looming, someone's hand gripping my wrist too tight, laughter ringing in my ears, darkness swallowing me whole. By the time the car finally pulled back into our driveway on Sunday evening, my body felt like it belonged to someone else. Every muscle ached, my stomach churned with waves of nausea, and my head pounded as if drums were beating inside my skull. I tried to steady my breathing, clutching the handle of the car door, praying I could make it inside without collapsing. My father kept his eyes on the road, silent, while Victoria tapped messages into her phone with a smirk tugging at her lips. The trip that was supposed to be camping had ended in something I could not yet name, but felt deep in my bones as wrong. As I dragged myself into the house, my legs gave out for a moment, and I caught myself against the wall. Victoria's voice cut sharp as a whip. "Stop being dramatic! You just want attention!" I opened my mouth to protest, but the words caught in my throat. My abdomen twisted with stabbing pain that made me fold over. Cold sweat dripped down my back. I begged my father to take me to urgent care, but he brushed past me and muttered that I should sleep it off. The dismissal stung more than the physical agony. I had become invisible again, a nuisance rather than a daughter. That night, fever gripped me so hard I shivered under 2 blankets. My skin burned, my teeth chattered, and every time I drifted toward sleep, nightmares jolted me awake. By morning, bruises had surfaced across my ribs and thighs, ugly shades of purple and green. I stared at them in the bathroom mirror, horrified. They were not the kind of marks that came from bumping into furniture. These were the fingerprints of control, the silent language of violence. When I showed Victoria, hoping for even a sliver of concern, she sneered. "You probably did that to yourself, always looking for pity." Her words were knives twisting deep. Later that afternoon, I stumbled onto the porch for air. My vision blurred and the world tilted beneath me. That was when Eleanor Hayes, our 72-year-old neighbor, appeared across the fence. She carried a basket of laundry, but the moment she saw me, she froze. "Rachel, child, what on earth?" She hurried over, dropping the basket, her face etched with alarm. She took one look at my fever-flushed skin and the bruises peeking from under my sleeve, and she did not hesitate. "I am calling an ambulance." I tried to protest, fear choking me. "If you call, they will cut me off. I will lose everything." Eleanor placed her weathered hand on mine and said firmly, "Better to lose money than your life." Minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet street. Paramedics rushed me into their care while my father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, expression stone cold. Victoria hissed behind him, "You are making a fool of yourself. Let them waste their time." In that moment, I realized they would rather see me dead than admit the truth. At the hospital, Dr. Jenkins appeared again. Her brow furrowed as she examined me. She asked questions rapid fire. "How long have you been sick? When did the bruising start? Who was with you this weekend?" My answers stumbled out in fragments. I was terrified that if I told the whole truth, my father would cut me off completely, leaving me without tuition, without a future. Dr. Jenkins saw my hesitation. She leaned close, her voice quiet but unyielding. "Rachel, I need you to understand. This is not your fault. Someone hurt you, and it is my duty to protect you." I wanted to believe her, but decades of conditioning screamed otherwise. My father's voice echoed in my head. "No one will believe you. You are just a spoiled girl." I bit my lip until I tasted blood. Beside her, Nurse James studied the bruises, tracing their patterns with his eyes. He looked at me and shook his head slowly. "These are not random," he said, voice low but firm. "This is a pattern. A deliberate pattern of abuse." His words sliced through my fear, naming the thing I had tried so long to deny. It was not clumsiness. It was not overreaction. It was abuse, and it had been happening for years. My body was the evidence I could not hide anymore. The fever blurred the edges of reality, but somewhere in the haze, I found myself clutching a pen that Nurse James had left on the tray. My hand moved almost without my consent, scrawling jagged words across a scrap of paper. "House. Drink. Daddy watching. Victoria laughing." When I came back to myself, I stared at the page in horror. It was my memory leaking out in fragments, pieces of the nightmare refusing to stay buried. Dr. Jenkins picked up the paper carefully, as though it were a piece of evidence. She met my eyes with a gravity that made my chest tighten. "Rachel," she said gently, "this helps us understand. Please keep writing whatever you remember." I wanted to stop, but the images pushed through, relentless. A staircase, strangers, faces, the weight of hands gripping too tightly. Each word felt like a confession and a lifeline all at once. When the blood tests returned, Dr. Jenkins studied them in silence for a long moment before looking at me. Her professional mask faltered just for an instant as she swallowed hard. "Rachel, she said we found traces of a sedative in your system. This is not medication for someone your age. It is strong, dangerous, and given without medical reason, it could have caused lasting harm." My stomach twisted. I thought of the bitter drink forced into my hand, the way the room had spun, the way my father had stood still watching. A sob broke from my throat. He let it happen. He let them do this to me. Dr. Jenkins placed a hand lightly on my arm. "Someone administered this to you deliberately. That is not your fault." Her voice trembled at the edges, but she spoke with determination. "I have a duty to act. I need to notify the authorities immediately." My heart raced with panic. "If you do, they will cut me off. I will lose my tuition, my degree. My future will be gone." Jenkins shook her head, her eyes glistening. "A future is meaningless if you are not alive to see it." She stepped toward the phone on the wall, her hand unsteady but resolute. She dialed, and when the dispatcher answered, her tone became iron. "This is Dr. Catherine Jenkins. I have a 22-year-old female patient with confirmed sedation in her system and evidence of physical abuse, requesting immediate law enforcement and protective intervention." As she spoke, I felt both terror and relief flood through me. Terror of what my father would do when he found out I had broken the silence, but relief that finally someone believed me enough to fight for me. James stood by the door, arms crossed, his expression fierce. "You are not alone anymore," he said quietly. My eyes stung with tears. For years, I had carried the weight of doubt gaslit into thinking I was dramatic, spoiled, unstable. But now, my broken body had told the truth for me. The bruises, the fever, the drugs in my blood. Evidence that could not be explained away. I lay back against the pillow, trembling as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The sound was not just noise. It was the arrival of justice, the beginning of something I had never dared to hope for. The police arrived within the hour, their presence filling the sterile hospital corridors with a sense of gravity that made my stomach twist tighter. Detective Michael Parker introduced himself in a calm but firm voice, his eyes scanning me with the precision of someone who had seen too many broken stories. He asked for details, but before I could answer, the door swung open. My father Nathan strode in as if the room belonged to him. His tie loosened, his jaw set in irritation rather than concern. Victoria followed close behind, her heels clacking against the linoleum, her painted lips curved in a cold smile. "What is all this drama?" Nathan demanded, his voice booming against the walls. "Rachel, you drank too much at that party, did you not?" He turned to the detective. "My daughter is irresponsible, always has been. She cannot handle herself, and now she is wasting everyone's time." His words struck like blows, each syllable designed to erase me. I tried to speak, but Victoria cut in her laugh sharp. "She loves being the victim. Every bruise, every tear, it is all an act. She thrives on pity." Detective Parker held up a hand to silence them, his expression hardening. "We have medical evidence of sedation and physical trauma. This is not theatrics." Victoria crossed her arms, scoffing, but Nathan's eyes narrowed with the first flicker of unease. For years they had been able to twist every narrative, convince neighbors and even relatives that I was unstable. But here in this room, the evidence was undeniable. Still, my father pressed on. "She is lying. Always has been. She makes up stories to make me look bad." The venom in his tone made my chest tighten. Before Parker could respond, the door opened again and Samantha, my cousin, slipped in. She was older than me by a few years, polished and confident, someone I had once trusted. She wrapped an arm around Victoria as though aligning herself visibly. Detective Samantha said smoothly, "Rachel has always been dramatic. I can vouch for my uncle and aunt. They are good people." My vision blurred with betrayal. Samantha, who I had confided in late at night, who had promised she understood, now turned her back on me without hesitation. My pulse hammered, but Parker remained steady, asking pointed questions, his pen scratching across his notebook. As they spoke, a nurse entered quietly and handed him a folder. Inside were bank records Dr. Jenkins had requested for review. Parker's eyes sharpened as he flipped through them. He looked up, his voice deliberate. "Mr. Morgan, can you explain why withdrawals from the account set aside for Rachel's tuition were made to cover gambling debts and payments to Victor Reynolds?" The room froze. My father's face drained of color before he recovered with a forced laugh. "That is my money to manage. She is my daughter. She does not need to know the details." Parker leaned forward. "Actually, that account was created by her mother for Rachel's education. These records show clear misuse." Nathan's mask slipped, anger flashing. "That girl will never be worthy of what her mother left. She is weak. She is nothing. The words cut, but they also exposed him. For the first time, the lies he built crumbled in front of witnesses. Victoria hissed at him under her breath, trying to maintain control, but the detective had heard enough. Samantha's eyes darted nervously between us, her composure faltering. I saw it then, the cracks beginning to spread through their perfect facade. My father's denial, Victoria's gaslighting, Samantha's betrayal, all of it was unraveling. And I, bruised and trembling on the hospital bed, finally had more than scars. I had proof. The next morning, Detective Parker returned his expression grim but purposeful. He explained that he had secured a warrant to search Victor Reynolds' house, the very place where my so-called camping trip had ended. I felt my throat tighten as he described what they found. In a locked cabinet behind the bar, police recovered several bottles of prescription sedatives, the same type that showed up in my blood tests. More alarming was a black notebook filled with names and numbers. At the bottom of one page was my father's name underlined with figures that looked like debts. Parker placed the evidence bag gently on the hospital table beside me, his eyes softening as he watched my reaction. Rachel, this shows a pattern of coercion. It looks like your father was involved financially with Reynolds. I pressed my palms together to stop them from shaking. I had always suspected money was the true chain that bound me, but seeing it confirmed left me dizzy. My father had been siphoning funds from my mother's inheritance, using my education as leverage while squandering the money on parties and debts. Worse still, Parker revealed that several documents bore my signature. I frowned confused until he produced copies: loan agreements, promissory notes, lines of credit. All under my name. The signatures looked eerily like mine, but I knew I had never signed them. At first, I thought forgery, but Parker explained that one form in particular had been signed in my presence at the bank months ago. Memory surged. Nathan had shoved a stack of papers toward me, insisting they were routine tuition documents. "Sign here," he had commanded. I obeyed, too afraid to question him. Now I realized he had trapped me in debts I never agreed to, debts that tied me to his failures. "That is financial coercion," Parker said firmly, "and it is a crime." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Rachel, during questioning your father slipped. He said, and I quote, 'She never deserved a dime of her mother's money. She is weak. She is nothing.'" My chest tightened. Hearing the words secondhand still burned, but Parker's next statement gave me strength. "We recorded it. It is admissible in court." Nathan's own arrogance had handed me the weapon I needed. For years he had told me no one would believe me. Now his own voice would prove him wrong. I looked down at the bruises decorating my arms, then at the bank records. The evidence was mounting like bricks in a wall that might finally cage the man who had caged me. Victoria, too, could not escape. Parker explained that she had been present during several transactions, her signature appearing as a witness. She had played her role in the conspiracy willingly. The investigation spread wider with every hour. Detectives traced funds from Victor's house to accounts linked to my father. Witnesses from the party admitted they saw me drinking from a cup Victoria handed me. One even confessed they heard Nathan joke that his daughter needed to be taught a lesson. Each piece of testimony sliced another thread of denial. Yet the confrontation was far from over. When Parker escorted me into the interrogation room to identify documents, my father was there, restrained but seething. His eyes bored into mine with venom. "You think you can destroy me, Rachel?" He spat my name as if it were poison. "You are nothing without me." For the first time, I lifted my chin and met his gaze. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "For the first time, I am something without you." Parker pressed play on the recorder. My father's voice filled the room, cruel and arrogant, repeating the words he thought would never leave those walls. "She never deserved a dime. She is nothing." The silence that followed was heavier than chains. Nathan lunged forward, restrained instantly by officers. His mask was shattered, his lies exposed. I felt my knees tremble, but I stood taller. Years of gaslighting had told me I was invisible. But here in this sterile room, surrounded by evidence and witnesses, I realized the truth. I was seen, and he could no longer hide. It was Samantha who broke first. My cousin, the one who had smiled at me during holidays and pretended to care, showed up at the hospital days later with her shoulders slumped and her eyes ringed with exhaustion. She asked Detective Parker if she could speak privately, and for a moment I almost refused the betrayal still raw, but Parker insisted on staying in the room, notebook in hand. Samantha twisted her bracelet nervously before speaking. "Rachel," she began, "I need to tell the truth." I stared at her cold and silent. She swallowed hard. "Uncle Nathan and Victoria asked me to help them. They wanted me to back up their story that you were unstable, that you made things up. They told me if I testified for them, I would have my student loans paid off." I felt the air leave my lungs. All the nights I had confided in her about my pain, all the times she nodded sympathetically. She had been calculating how to use my suffering for her own gain. Parker leaned forward. "What changed your mind, Samantha?" She closed her eyes. "Because I saw the papers. I know about the inheritance." She looked at me with shame. "Rachel, your mother left everything to you. Not to Nathan, not to Victoria. The original will is still in existence. Eleanor, your neighbor, kept a copy." My heart pounded as if it would burst. Eleanor, the kind woman who had held my hand on the porch, had protected something vital all along. Samantha continued, her voice breaking. "Nathan used me to make you look crazy so no one would question why he controlled the money. He promised me security, but all he gave me was guilt." Parker's pen scratched across the page, recording every word. He asked her to clarify, and she admitted that Victoria had been the mastermind of many lies, coaching her on what to say, whispering how to twist my actions into instability. They planned to paint me as hysterical so the courts would never release the funds to me. The full weight of their scheme pressed on me. My father, my stepmother, even my cousin, all conspiring to erase me, to strip me of not only money, but identity. And yet here, Samantha was confessing, cracking under the pressure of truth. I wanted to hate her, and part of me did, but another part recognized the shift. Her betrayal had cut deep, but her testimony might expose them all. Eleanor arrived later that day, clutching a worn folder. Inside was the will, written in my mother's handwriting, notarized and sealed. It declared clearly that her estate was to pass to me upon reaching adulthood with provisions for my education. No mention of Nathan controlling it. No clause giving Victoria rights. The document was a weapon pure and undeniable. Tears blurred my vision as Eleanor placed it in my hands. "Your mother wanted you safe," she said firmly. "She trusted you. I had hidden this, afraid Nathan would destroy it, but it is yours now." In that moment, I realized the truth I had denied for so long. I was not weak. I was not nothing. I was the rightful heir to my mother's legacy, and their entire campaign of control had been built on lies. Samantha's betrayal had stung, but her confession paired with Eleanor's loyalty shifted the balance. Nathan and Victoria had spent years convincing me I was invisible. Now the evidence proved otherwise. Their hunger for money and power had driven every cruelty, every manipulation. I clenched the will in my trembling hands and whispered to myself, "This ends with me." And for the first time, I believed it. The courtroom was colder than I expected, a cavern of polished wood and sharp whispers. Reporters lined the benches, their pens ready, cameras waiting like predators for the spectacle to begin. I sat at the front with Eleanor's steady hand resting on mine. Across the aisle, Nathan adjusted his suit jacket, trying to appear composed, but his eyes darted nervously. Victoria sat rigid beside him, her face powdered and pale lips tight as if holding back rage. Samantha called, as a witness for the prosecution, sat further down the bench, twisting her hands, knowing her cooperation had spared her harsher charges. When the judge entered the room, hushed. Proceedings began with the charges read aloud. Abuse, fraud, financial coercion, conspiracy. Each word was a hammer striking against the fragile wall my father had built around himself. Victoria flinched when her name was paired with manipulation and conspiracy, the mask of elegance slipping. I watched her tremble for the first time. The prosecutor presented the medical evidence first. Dr. Jenkins testified, her voice firm, though her eyes lingered on me with compassion. She described the sedative in my system, the bruises, the fever, and declared clearly that these injuries were not self-inflicted. Nurse James corroborated her account, pointing to photographs of the marks on my wrists and arms. The jury's eyes darkened as they studied the images, horror evident on their faces. Next came Detective Parker. He outlined the investigation, detailing the search of Victor Reynolds' house, the discovery of prescription sedatives in the black notebook with Nathan's name scrawled beside dollar signs. Then he played the recording of my father's own words. "She never deserved a dime. She is weak. She is nothing." The sound echoed through the courtroom, every syllable a dagger. Gasps rippled across the benches. Nathan's jaw tightened, his composure unraveling under the weight of his arrogance. When the prosecutor produced the original will safeguarded by Eleanor, the room shifted entirely. It was undeniable proof that my mother had intended every cent to come to me. The forged documents, the coerced signatures, the siphoning of funds, all of it was exposed as theft and manipulation. Eleanor herself testified, her voice unwavering despite her age. She told the jury how she had hidden the will to protect it from destruction, how she had seen me suffering under Nathan and Victoria's control, and how she had always known this day would come. Her presence was a beacon, steady and righteous. Then came Samantha's turn. She walked to the witness stand, shoulders bent under the weight of shame. Her voice shook as she admitted she had been bribed to support Nathan and Victoria's lies, that she had repeated their words to paint me as unstable, but that guilt had consumed her. She described Victoria's coaching, the deliberate plot to silence me. Though I still felt the sting of betrayal, I saw the jury leaning in, recognizing the significance of her confession. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, my legs trembling but my heart resolute. I faced the judge, the jury, the sea of strangers waiting to hear my truth. I spoke of the years of gaslighting, of being told I was nothing, of financial control wielded like a weapon. I described the night at Victor's house, the bitter drink, the laughter, my father's cold eyes watching as I crumbled. My voice shook, but I did not stop. I wanted them all to know what it meant to be erased and then to fight back. The defense tried to twist my words, suggesting exaggeration, but every piece of evidence crushed their arguments. The photographs, the medical reports, the bank statements, the will, all arrows pointing in one direction. When closing arguments ended, the judge called for a recess. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed microphones thrust toward my face. Reporters shouted questions. "How do you feel, Rachel? Do you believe justice will be served?" I answered simply. My father tried to make me invisible. Today, everyone sees me. Inside, the verdict came swiftly. Guilty on all counts for Nathan. Guilty of conspiracy and manipulation for Victoria. Samantha was granted leniency for her cooperation, her shame evident as she avoided my eyes. Sentencing followed weeks later. Nathan received prison time for abuse and fraud, along with restitution for the stolen funds. Victoria faced her own sentence, her reputation shredded beyond repair. Photographs of Nathan in handcuffs splashed across newspapers. Victoria's tear-streaked face captured on camera as she was escorted away. Public humiliation became part of their punishment, and for the first time I felt a weight lift. They had built their power on appearances, on the illusion of control. Stripped bare before the world, they had nothing left. As I stood on the courthouse steps after the final gavel fell, I spoke not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever been silenced. "You tried to erase me," I said, my voice carrying over the crowd. "But I am here, and I will never disappear again." The applause that followed was not just noise. It was validation. It was the sound of justice finally arriving. In the weeks after the trial, the silence in my life felt strange. For so long, my days had been filled with fear, the constant weight of walking on eggshells, the dread of every phone call from my father or every sneer from Victoria. Now the phone stayed quiet except for calls from supporters and attorneys, and the house no longer echoed with accusations. The court released my mother's inheritance back to me, the funds that had been meant for my education and future. Holding the documents that proved the account was finally mine, I cried in Eleanor's kitchen, the relief washing over me in waves. With her encouragement, I decided not to spend it all on myself. I set aside a portion to finish my degree and used another portion to establish a scholarship for young women who had endured family abuse, hoping to create opportunities where silence had once reigned. Healing did not happen overnight. Some mornings I woke sweating, convinced I could still hear Victoria's voice mocking me. Other nights, I dreamed of my father's cold eyes watching from across the room as strangers pressed a bitter drink into my hand. But therapy sessions with Dr. Chin, introduced through the hospital, helped me learn to name the trauma rather than drown in it. She taught me that healing was not about forgetting, but about choosing not to let the past dictate my worth. Eleanor became my anchor. We planted tulip bulbs in her garden one crisp afternoon, our hands covered in soil, our breaths visible in the autumn air. "These will sleep through winter," she said, "but come spring, they will bloom brighter than ever." Her words settled into me like a promise. I realized that I, too, was gathering strength beneath the surface, preparing to bloom after a long season of darkness. On the day the first green shoots pushed through the soil, I stood with her watching the earth come alive. "Rachel," she said softly, "you survived, and now you are growing." The image stayed with me as I walked across campus to finish my final exams, as I stood before the small group of students who would benefit from the scholarship as I wrote my first speech about resilience. Publicly telling my story was terrifying, but also liberating. At a community event, I shared the words that had once been whispered to me as insults. They said I was nothing. They said I was invisible. But I stand here visible, worthy, and unbroken. The applause filled the auditorium, but what mattered most was seeing young women in the audience wiping tears, knowing they felt less alone. Months later, I visited the courthouse again, this time not as a victim, but as an advocate. I met with families navigating the same path I had walked, offering guidance, sharing resources, simply listening. Every conversation reminded me that the cycle of control could be broken. Standing in Eleanor's garden that spring, tulips bursting in reds and yellows, I felt the warmth of the sun on my face. The nightmare had not disappeared, but it no longer defined me. I whispered to the flowers, as if to my mother I made it through the winter. My voice carried steady and clear. For the first time, I believed it fully.